here's a question, a fundamental question about the British election which has just been announced to take place in May 2010. What is the point of a political party having an election manifesto if most of the people in the country don't believe a single word of what it says? In case you think this is a little bit of an exaggeration, the fact is that if you look at polls of trust of different groups in our society, 90% of the UK population doesn't trust politicians, 90% of them also don't trust journalists. And that's a toxic combination when you put the two of those groups together to try and cover an election. Now that's compared to, say, 60 to 70 or even 80% of the population trusting teachers or doctors. So there are very, very big gaps in trust. Why should that be? Well, this was long before the current spat of sleazy scandals regarding payments of various kinds, expenses and other things. This survey has been a fairly constant finding going back over the last 10 to 15 years. And you see the same lack of confidence in political figures in Europe, in countries like Germany, Sweden, Spain, Portugal, France, Italy. It may vary to some extent, but you see a profound unease about political figures taking positions on particular issues which some suspect are motivated by desires for power, desires to please an electorate, and a loss of deep integrity when it comes to taking positions which may be very unpopular with most people and might mean that you lose office altogether. We see the same malaise in the United States of America. We see it over questions about the funding of political parties, the suggestion that some politicians are overly influenced by groups that they have got money from over the years leading up to their election. We see it in the UK in the dispute between the Conservatives and the Labour Party over whether some big business investors are bringing too much influence over the Conservative Party, or whether the unions have got too much influence over the Labour Party. Now, what can be done to restore this trust? Because the fact is that unless we do so, democracy itself as a moral force comes into question. Because you can have all kinds of people voting, and maybe not the majority even of the electorate voting in an election, but the degree of moral authority that a government has depends on the size of the majority, but most of all on the size of the turnout in the election. And nowhere do we see this more clearly than in the collapse of confidence regarding the work of the European Union in Brussels. If we look at the turnout in most countries in the Eurozone, and indeed outside it, countries like the UK, turnout for European elections, for members of the European Parliament, they are disastrously low. They are not large enough to be an unquestioned vote of confidence in the workings of the European Parliament. And when you look at the confidence of the people in the treaty that was ratified recently, you discover the same thing. In fact, you discover that in most countries there wasn't even a vote on the treaty. Why? Because there was a fear that the public would not find in favour. When the French were given a chance to vote on it, they voted it down. The Irish the same first time round. So the electorate is thoroughly separated from the processes of government across the European Union and inside many countries. How do we sort this out? Well, politicians are going to have to prove that they are men and women of integrity, willing to vote themselves out of office effectively by adopting policies which they are convinced are the morally right ones, even though they may be unpopular with those that they are seeking election from. They have to show us that they are not going to kowtow to particular pressure groups and interest groups. They're not going to give undue influence to those who try to lobby them, who pay for access to all kinds of privileges at meetings, dinners and other events. They're going to have to show that they are particularly scrupulous in the use of finance, not only in the claims of their own expenses, but in the way that they award contracts to others, especially those connected with members of their own family. Now, while there have been a huge number of headlines regarding the expensive scandals in the UK, I have to say that from my travels in 52 other countries, and observations of political systems there that the British system is probably one of the least corrupt in the world. The British people have a sensitivity to integrity that I think is unmatched in many other nations. And we see it in the investigative journalism, the insistence that people in public life resign on relatively small things. I say relatively small, things that appear huge in the UK, but which would be regarded as totally trivial and of no real consequence in many other countries. So I'm grateful for our political system. I'm grateful for the democratic process. But democracy itself is sick at the very heart unless the people can have confidence restored in those that are seeking election.